She held the letter that promised her freedom, a ticket to Boston, to wealth, to everything she'd ever dreamed of escaping this dusty frontier town. But she never saw it coming. The cowboy who'd watched her in silence for 5 long years stepped forward with a letter of his own and changed everything. One woman, 2 letters, 2 completely different futures. Which path would she choose? Stay with me until the very end and drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The morning sun rose blood red over the Arizona territory, painting the desert in shades of copper and rust. It was the kind of sunrise that old-timers said meant trouble was coming, the kind that settled into a man's bones and whispered warnings he couldn't quite understand. But Marian Ellery wasn't thinking about omens. She stood behind the counter of Ellery's general store, her father's legacy, her prison, her only connection to the man who had raised her alone in this unforgiving land. The wooden floorboards creaked beneath her feet as she moved, a sound so familiar it had become part of her heartbeat. 5 years. 5 long years since consumption had taken Samuel Ellery from this world, leaving his 23-year-old daughter to run the only mercantile between Copper Creek and the distant shimmer of Tucson. The letter sat in her apron pocket, folded and refolded so many times the creases had worn thin. She didn't need to read it again. She had memorized every word, every flourish of her Aunt Catherine's elegant handwriting. My dearest Marian, it pains me to think of you wasting away in that desolate territory, surrounded by dust and savages and men of no refinement. Your mother, my beloved sister, would weep to see what has become of her daughter. You were meant for so much more. I am extending to you a formal invitation to return to Boston, where you belong. I have no children of my own, as you know, and my husband's fortune ensures that whoever I name as my heir will want for nothing. Come home, Marian. Let me introduce you to society, to culture, to gentlemen worthy of your hand. The life you were born to live is waiting. With deepest affection, your Aunt Catherine Marian pressed her hand against her pocket, feeling the sharp edges of the paper through the worn cotton of her apron. Home. Her aunt called Boston home, but Marian had never lived there, had only heard stories from her mother, Sarah, who had defied her wealthy family to marry a poor frontier merchant and follow him into the wild unknown. Sarah Ellery had died giving birth to Marian in a small cabin outside Copper Creek. Marian had never known her mother's face except through a faded daguerreotype that sat on her nightstand, a young woman with hopeful eyes and a smile that seemed to hold secrets she would never share. You look troubled, Miss Ellery. Marian startled, her hand flying to her heart. She had been so lost in thought that she hadn't heard the door open, hadn't heard the familiar jingle of the bell her father had installed years ago. Cole Harwood stood in the doorway, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the morning light. He removed his hat, a gesture of respect he never failed to make in her presence, and stepped inside, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Harwood, she said, composing herself. I didn't hear you come in. You seemed 100 miles away. He approached the counter slowly, the way he always did, never rushed, never presumptuous. His eyes, the color of aged whiskey, studied her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. Everything all right? Fine. Everything is fine. It was a lie, and they both knew it. But Cole Harwood was not the kind of man to press where he wasn't invited. I need supplies, he said, setting a list on the counter. Flour, sugar, coffee, the usual. Marian took the list, grateful for the distraction. She moved through the narrow aisles of the store, pulling items from shelves her father had built with his own hands. The store smelled of leather and tobacco and the faint sweetness of hard candy kept in jars by the register. Smells that reminded her of childhood, of safety, of a time when the future seemed full of possibility rather than constraint. I heard there might be a storm coming, Cole said, leaning against the counter. Spring storms in the territory can be brutal. You might want to stock up yourself. I'll manage. I don't doubt it. There was something in his voice, admiration, perhaps, or understanding. You always do. Marian set his supplies on the counter and began calculating the total. Her fingers moved across the ledger automatically, her mind elsewhere. She could feel Cole watching her, could sense the weight of his presence filling the small space between them. That'll be $2.40, she said. Cole reached into his pocket and produced the coins, setting them carefully on the counter. His hands were rough, calloused from years of hard work, hands that had built a ranch from nothing, that had tamed wild horses and mended broken fences and done the 1,000 small tasks that kept a man alive on the frontier. "Miss Ellery," he said, and something in his tone made her look up. "I've been meaning to ask you something." Her heart stuttered. "Yes?" But before he could speak, the door burst open again, and Martha Jennings rushed in, her face flushed with excitement. "Marion, have you heard? The stage from Tucson brought news. There's a troupe of actors coming through next month. Real theater, can you imagine?" Cole stepped back, the moment broken. He tipped his hat to both women. "Ladies, I'll let you talk." He gathered his supplies and left without another word, the door closing behind him with a soft click that seemed louder than it should have been. Martha watched him go, then turned to Marion with raised eyebrows. "That man looks at you like you hung the moon, you know." "Don't be ridiculous. I'm not being anything but honest." Martha leaned on the counter conspiratorially. "Cole Harwood is the most eligible bachelor in Copper Creek. Half the women in town have set their caps for him, and he barely notices any of them. But you? He finds reasons to come into this store 3 times a week. He needs supplies. He has ranch hands who could fetch supplies. He comes here for you, Marion." Marion turned away, busying herself with straightening items that didn't need straightening. "Mr. Harwood and I have a business relationship, nothing more." Martha's tone suggested she believed none of it. "And what's that letter you've been hiding in your pocket all week?" Marion froze. "How did you—" "I'm your friend, Marion. I notice things." Martha's expression softened. "Is it bad news?" For a long moment, Marion said nothing. Then slowly, she reached into her pocket and withdrew the letter, handing it to Martha wordlessly. She watched her friend's face as she read, watched the expression shift from curiosity to surprise to something that looked almost like grief. "Boston," Martha whispered. "You're going to Boston?" "I haven't decided." "But your aunt, she's offering you everything. Wealth, society, a proper life." "Yes." Martha looked up, her eyes glistening. "You'd really leave? Leave Copper Creek? Leave everything?" Marion took the letter back, folding it carefully. "I've spent 5 years in this store, Martha. 5 years watching everyone else live their lives while I count inventory and balance ledgers. 5 years of people looking at me with pity. Poor Marion Ellery, the merchant's orphan, too proud to take charity, but too burdened to have a future of her own. That's not how people see you. Isn't it?" Marion's voice cracked. "My mother gave up everything to come here. She left wealth and comfort and a family who loved her because she believed in something more. And what did it get her? An early grave and a daughter who's trapped in the very life she tried to escape." Martha reached across the counter and took Marion's hand. "Your mother chose love, Marion. That's not nothing." Love. The word tasted bitter on Marion's tongue. Love killed her. Love stranded her in the middle of nowhere with a husband who worked himself to death trying to give her the life she deserved. Love left me alone at 18 with nothing but a failing store and a mountain of debt. The store isn't failing anymore. You've made it thrive. And what good is that? I'll spend the rest of my life selling flour and fabric to frontier wives while my aunt's offer gathers dust." Marion pulled her hand away. "Maybe it's time I stopped being afraid of the life I was supposed to have." Martha was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, "What about Cole?" "What about him?" "You can't tell me you don't feel anything for him." Marion turned away, her jaw tight. "What I feel doesn't matter. Cole Harwood is a rancher in Arizona Territory. My aunt is offering me Boston society. Those aren't lives that intersect. But, Martha, please." Marion's voice was tired now, heavy with the weight of decisions unmade. "I need time to think. Alone." Martha nodded slowly. She gathered her things and moved toward the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. "For what it's worth," she said, "I think you already know what you want, Marion. You're just afraid to admit it." The door closed behind her, and Marion was left alone with the silence and the dust and the letter that promised everything she thought she'd always wanted. The days that followed were filled with the ordinary business of survival. Marion opened the store each morning at 7, swept the floors, arranged the shelves, and greeted the customers who trickled in throughout the day. She sold nails to ranchers and ribbon to wives. She extended credit to families who couldn't pay until harvest, and she recorded every transaction in the leather-bound ledger her father had started 20 years ago. But beneath the routine, her mind churned. Boston. The word echoed in her thoughts like a melody she couldn't shake. She imagined cobblestone streets and gaslit parlors, elegant dresses, and conversations about art and literature instead of cattle prices and drought. She imagined meeting men with soft hands and educated minds, men who had never fired a gun or slept under the stars or buried a friend in the hard desert ground. She imagined finally becoming the woman her mother had been meant to be. But every time she reached for that dream, another image intruded. Broad shoulders silhouetted against the sunrise, whiskey-colored eyes watching her with quiet intensity, rough hands setting coins carefully on her counter. Cole Harwood. He came to the store again 2 days later, this time with no list of supplies, just a question about whether she'd heard anything more about the coming storm. The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but Marian found herself thinking about it for hours afterward, replaying every word, every glance, every moment of silence that seemed to say more than words ever could. She was being foolish, she told herself. Cole was a rancher, a man of the frontier, a man who probably couldn't tell Shakespeare from a shotgun. He represented everything she was trying to escape: the dust, the isolation, the endless struggle of life in a land that gave nothing without extracting a price. And yet, when he looked at her, she felt seen in a way she had never experienced before. Not pitied, not admired, not desired, seen. As if he understood exactly who she was, with all her contradictions and fears and hidden dreams, and found her worthy anyway. It was terrifying, it was intoxicating, and it was something she could not afford to feel. A week after Martha's visit, Marian made a decision. She would write to her aunt and accept the invitation. She would sell the store, Thomas Bradley had been asking about it for years, and use the money to pay off the last of her father's debts. She would board a stagecoach to Tucson, take the railroad east, and arrive in Boston by summer's end, ready to begin a new chapter of her life. It was the sensible thing to do, the practical thing, the thing her mother should have done 30 years ago, before she threw her future away for a man who could give her nothing but heartache. Marian sat at her desk that evening, pen in hand, the blank page waiting. She dipped the pen in ink and began to write. Dear Aunt Catherine, thank you for your generous invitation. After much consideration, she stopped. The words blurred before her eyes, and she realized she was crying, silent tears that traced paths down her cheeks, and dripped onto the paper, smudging the ink into illegible shadows. What was wrong with her? This was what she wanted. This was her escape, her chance, her future. Why couldn't she write the words? A knock at the door made her jump. She wiped her eyes hastily and rose, crossing the small room above the store that served as her living quarters. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Coming, she called, her voice steadier than she felt. She opened the door and found Cole Harwood standing on her landing, his hat in his hands, his expression unreadable. Mr. Harwood, she said, surprised. It's late. Is something wrong? No, yes, He stopped, took a breath, and started again. Miss Ellery, I need to speak with you. It can't wait. She should have turned him away. It was improper for him to be here after dark, improper for them to be alone together in her private rooms. But something in his eyes, something urgent, something raw, made her step aside. Come in. He entered, seeming to fill the small space with his presence. He looked around briefly, taking in the simple furnishings, the books stacked on every surface, the half-written letter on her desk, and then turned to face her. I've been trying to say this for 5 years, he said. Every time I come into your store, I tell myself, this is the day. This is the day you'll find the words. And every time I lose my nerve. Marian's heart was pounding. Mr. Harwood, Cole, he interrupted. Please, I've been Mr. Harwood to you for too long. Just this once, call me Cole. She swallowed hard. Cole. The sound of his name on her lips seemed to give him courage. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a letter, not the crisp stationery of Boston society, but rough paper, slightly crumpled, as if it had been written and rewritten many times. I heard about your aunt's invitation, he said. Word travels fast in a small town, and I know I have no right to ask you to stay, no right to offer you anything when a woman like you could have so much more. But I couldn't let you leave without knowing. He held out the letter. His hand trembled slightly. Read it, he said. And then, if you still want to go to Boston, I'll never speak of this again. I'll wish you well and step aside and spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been. But at least you'll know the truth. Marian took the letter. The paper was warm from being pressed against his chest, and she could smell leather and sage and something that was uniquely him. Cole, I don't... Read it, he said again. Please. She unfolded the paper slowly, her hands unsteady. The handwriting was bold but careful, the letters formed with obvious effort by a man more comfortable with a lasso than a pen. Miss Ellery, Marian. I'm not a man of many words. My father taught me that talk is cheap and actions speak true. But some things need saying, and I've been a coward too long. I've been watching you for 5 years. Not the way some men watch women, looking for weakness or wanting something they haven't earned. I've been watching you because you're the most remarkable woman I've ever known. And every day I learn something new about courage just by seeing how you live your life. You took over your father's store when you were barely more than a girl. You could have sold it, could have given up, could have found some man to marry and let him carry your burdens. But you didn't. You worked and sacrificed and built something real, something lasting. You extended credit to families who couldn't pay and never once made them feel ashamed. You stayed up nights keeping books and learning business and turning a failing store into the heart of this town. And you did it alone, without complaint, without asking for anything from anyone. I'm not a rich man, Marian. I can't offer you Boston society or elegant parlors or a life of ease. What I have is a ranch that I built with my own 2 hands, a herd that grows a little bigger every year, and a heart that has belonged to you since the first day I walked into your store and saw you smile. I know I'm not what you dreamed of. I know there's a whole world out there you've never seen, and maybe you need to see it before you can know what you truly want. But I couldn't let you go without telling you that there's a man in Copper Creek who would spend every day of his life trying to make you happy, if you'd let him. I don't offer wealth, Marian. I only offer a life we build together. Whatever you decide, know this: you are worthy of everything good in this world. And if Boston is what you want, then I hope you find every happiness there. But if you ever wonder what you might be leaving behind, the answer is me, yours, in whatever way you'll have me. Cole Marian read the letter twice, then a third time. Her tears fell freely now, spotting the rough paper, blurring words that had already etched themselves into her soul. When she finally looked up, Cole was watching her with an expression of such raw vulnerability that it took her breath away. This was not the confident rancher who commanded respect from every man in Copper Creek. This was a man who had laid his heart bare, knowing it might be trampled. Cole, she whispered, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. His voice was rough. I didn't write that to pressure you. I wrote it because you deserve to know. Whatever you choose, you deserve to make that choice with all the facts. But She stopped, overwhelmed. I've spent weeks planning to leave. I've told myself 100 times that Boston is what I want, what I'm supposed to want. And now I'm not asking you to choose right now. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. I'm asking you to take your time. Think about it. Think about what you really want, not what you think you should want. And if I still choose Boston? Pain flickered in his eyes, quickly suppressed. Then I'll drive you to the stagecoach myself and wish you well. You would do that? Even after... I love you, Marian. The words came out quiet but steady. That doesn't mean I own you. That doesn't mean I get to decide your future. If Boston is where you need to be, then I want you to go. Because the last thing I would ever do is trap you in a life you don't want. Marian stared at him, this man who had somehow understood things about love that most people never learned. Her mother had died for love, and her father had worked himself to death trying to be worthy of it. She had grown up believing that love was a beautiful tragedy, a force that destroyed as surely as it created. But Cole was offering something different. Not possession, not demand, partnership. I need time, she said finally, to think, to understand what I'm feeling. Take all the time you need. He turned toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Marion, I meant every word. And whatever you decide, nothing changes how I feel. Then he was gone, his footsteps heavy on the stairs, the door closing softly behind him. Marion stood in the center of her room, holding two letters, one that promised escape and one that offered home. She had never felt so lost, or so found. Sleep was impossible that night. Marion lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind whisper secrets through the cracks in the walls. The two letters sat on her nightstand side by side, her aunt's elegant stationery next to Cole's rough paper, and she couldn't stop glancing at them, as if they might somehow reveal the answer if she looked long enough. What did she want? It should have been an easy question. She had spent years dreaming of escape, imagining a life beyond the dust and struggle of the frontier. Boston represented everything her mother had given up: wealth, culture, refinement. Going there would be a kind of redemption, a way of reclaiming the birthright that should have been hers. But every time she tried to imagine herself in Boston, the picture felt flat, colorless. She saw ballrooms and drawing rooms, but she couldn't see herself in them. She saw elegant gentlemen, but their faces were blank, interchangeable, meaningless. When she thought of Copper Creek, she saw Cole. She saw his eyes crinkling when he smiled, something rare and precious, offered only to those he trusted. She saw his hands, strong and capable, lifting heavy crates she couldn't manage alone. She saw him leaning against her counter, asking about her day, listening as if her words were the most important thing in the world. She saw partnership, respect, understanding. Was that love? She didn't know. She had never been in love before, had never allowed herself the luxury. Love was dangerous, after all. Love was what had killed her mother and broken her father. Love was a trap that caught women and held them fast, stealing their futures one sacrifice at a time. But Cole wasn't asking for sacrifice. He was offering something else entirely, a chance to build, together, something neither of them could create alone. I don't offer wealth, Marion. I only offer a life we build together. The words echoed in her mind, refusing to be silenced. She sat up, lit a candle, and read his letter again by the flickering light. Then she read her aunt's letter, comparing the two, searching for answers in the contrast between elegant promises and rough-hewn honesty. Her aunt offered security, Cole offered partnership, her aunt offered escape, Cole offered home. Her aunt offered the life she was supposed to want. Cole offered Cole. Dawn was breaking by the time Marion finally made a decision, not a final one, not yet, but a first step. She would take Cole's advice. She would think. She would take her time. She would stop running from her feelings long enough to actually understand them. And she would stop pretending that Cole Harwood was just a customer who needed supplies. The days that followed were strange and electric, charged with possibility. Marion went about her routine, opening the store, serving customers, balancing the ledger. But everything felt different now, touched by an awareness that changed the color of ordinary moments. Cole came by every day, finding one excuse or another. He needed lamp oil. He needed to order fence posts. He wanted to check on a delivery that wasn't due for another week. Each visit was brief, painfully proper, but his eyes said everything his words didn't. I'm waiting. Take your time. I'll be here. They began to talk in a way they never had before, real conversations, not just pleasantries about weather and supplies. He told her about his ranch, about the early years when he'd slept in a tent and eaten beans from a can while slowly building something from nothing. She told him about her father, about the stories he used to tell of her mother, about the loneliness that had been her constant companion since his death. He sounds like a good man, Cole said one afternoon, sitting on a barrel while Marion counted inventory. He was. She paused, a bolt of fabric in her hands. But he never got over losing her. I think part of him died when she did. Some loves are like that. Is that supposed to be romantic? Her voice was sharper than she intended. A love so consuming that losing it destroys you? Cole considered the question seriously, as he did everything. I think it depends on the people. Some folks lose themselves in love, become so wrapped up in another person that they can't survive alone. But that's not love, really. That's something else. Need, maybe. Dependency. And real love? Real love makes you more than you were. It doesn't take from you, it adds. And if you lose it, he shrugged. It hurts like hell, no question. But you survive because the person you loved wouldn't want you to break. Marian set down the fabric, studying him. You sound like you're speaking from experience. Not personal experience. My parents. A smile ghosted across his face. They were married 40 years before my mother passed. My father grieved hard, don't get me wrong, but he kept going, kept living, kept building. Said that's what she would have wanted, for him to honor their love by living well, not by giving up. And he did? Kept living, I mean? He did. Remarried even a few years later. A widow from the next town over. They were happy together until he died last spring. I'm sorry. I didn't know. No reason you would. Cole stood, preparing to leave. But that's the kind of love I believe in, Marian. The kind that builds people up, not the kind that tears them down. The kind that makes two people stronger together than they ever could be apart. He tipped his hat and walked out, leaving her with thoughts she couldn't quite sort into words. It happened gradually, the shift in her heart. She couldn't point to a single moment when everything changed, couldn't identify the exact instant when her decision crystallized from uncertainty into clarity. But slowly, day by day, she began to understand what she truly wanted. It wasn't Boston. It had never been Boston. Boston was a fantasy, a childhood dream born from her mother's stories and her own loneliness. It represented escape from pain, from struggle, from the hard realities of life on the frontier. But escape wasn't the same as happiness. Running away wasn't the same as running toward. What she wanted was here. What she wanted was a life built on honest work and genuine partnership. What she wanted was someone who saw her clearly, respected her completely, and loved her without trying to change her. What she wanted was Cole. The realization came to her one evening as she was closing the store, counting the day's receipts and preparing to extinguish the lamps. She looked up from her work and saw, through the window, the last light of sunset painting the desert in shades of gold and amber, and she thought, this is beautiful. Not this would be beautiful if only, not this could be beautiful, but just this is beautiful. And in that moment, she understood that she didn't want to escape from Arizona territory. She wanted to belong to it. She wanted to put down roots deep enough to weather any storm. She wanted to build something lasting on this sun-scorched land, surrounded by people who knew her name and valued her presence. She wanted to stay. But wanting and doing were different things, and Marian had spent so many years building walls around her heart that she wasn't sure how to tear them down. She needed time to be certain. She needed to know that this wasn't just another form of fear, settling for the familiar because the unknown was too frightening. She needed to test herself, and she needed to test Cole, and she needed to be absolutely sure before she made a choice that would shape the rest of her life. So she waited, and she watched. And she let herself feel things she had been denying for 5 long years. The storm came 3 weeks later. It had been building for days, clouds piling on the horizon like dark mountains, the air growing thick and electric with portent. The old-timers muttered about the worst weather they'd seen in decades. Ranchers drove their cattle to higher ground. Families boarded up windows and stocked cellars with supplies. Marian worked late the night before it hit, helping last-minute customers load wagons with provisions. By the time she closed the store, her arms ached and her feet throbbed, but she felt a strange satisfaction in the exhaustion, the bone-deep contentment of useful work. She was locking the front door when Cole appeared out of the gathering darkness, his horse blowing hard, his face grim with concern. "You should come to the ranch," he said without preamble. "This storm is going to be bad, and I don't like the idea of you being alone in town. I've weathered storms before. Not like this one." He dismounted, leading his horse closer. "Marian, please, I'm not asking as anything except a friend who wants you to be safe. The ranch house is solid, built to withstand anything. And you'd have people around if something went wrong." She should have refused. It would have been the proper thing, the sensible thing. But something in his expression, the genuine worry, the careful respect even in urgency, made her hesitate. "Just until the storm passes?" "Just until it passes. You'll have your own room. Martha's there too. She came out to help with preparations. He smiled slightly. All perfectly proper, I promise. Marian considered for a moment, then nodded. Let me gather some things. An hour later, she was riding through the darkening desert beside Cole, her small bag of belongings strapped behind her saddle. The wind was picking up, sending tumbleweeds skittering across their path and whipping Marian's hair into a frenzy. The sky churned with clouds that seemed almost alive, constantly shifting and reforming. How bad do you really think it will be? She asked, raising her voice over the wind. Bad. Cole's jaw was tight. But we'll get through it. We always do. They reached the ranch just as the first drops of rain began to fall, heavy, stinging drops that hit like tiny stones. Cole's ranch hands were scrambling to secure the last of the animals, their shouts nearly lost in the growing howl of the wind. Inside, Cole ordered, taking her horse's reins. Martha's in the house. I'll be there as soon as I can. Marian ran for the porch, reaching the door just as the sky opened up and the rain became a torrent. Martha pulled her inside, her face pale but determined. Thank goodness you're here, she said. I was worried sick. Cole came to get me. Of course he did. Martha's expression softened. That man would walk through fire for you, Marian. I hope you know that. Before Marian could respond, the storm announced its full fury with a crack of thunder so loud it shook the walls. They spent the next hours huddled together in the main room, watching through windows as lightning split the sky and rain fell in sheets so thick they couldn't see the barn. Cole came in eventually, soaked to the skin, his face drawn with exhaustion. He changed quickly and joined them by the fire, and for a while no one spoke, just sat together in the strange intimacy of shared crisis, listening to the storm rage outside. The storm lasted through the night and well into the next day. When it finally passed, Marian stepped outside to a world transformed, creeks swollen into rivers, the desert floor a maze of newly formed channels and pools, the air washed clean and smelling of petrichor. The creek's flooded, Cole said, coming to stand beside her. Worse than I expected. Some of the fencing is probably gone, and I'll need to check on the far pastures. I'll help. He looked at her in surprise. You don't have to. I know. She met his eyes steadily. I want to. They worked together all that day and the next, Marian and Cole and the ranch hands mucking through mud and debris, rescuing stranded cattle, repairing what could be salvaged and taking stock of what couldn't. It was brutal, exhausting work, the kind that left muscles screaming and hands raw. And Marian had never felt more alive. There was something clarifying about physical labor, about stripping away all pretense and working side by side toward a common goal. She saw Cole as she'd never seen him before. Commanding, but never condescending, working harder than any of his men, taking time to check on each person and make sure they were holding up. She saw herself, too. Saw that she was stronger than she'd known, more capable, more resilient. The frontier had shaped her in ways she hadn't recognized, forged her in hardship until she could withstand almost anything. By the third day, the worst was over. The floodwaters were receding, the fences were patched, and life was slowly returning to normal. Marian sat on the ranch house porch, watching the sunset paint the wet desert in shades of rose and gold. Cole came to sit beside her, his body close enough that she could feel his warmth through her damp clothes. Thank you, he said quietly, for your help. You didn't have to. Yes, I did. She turned to face him. Cole, I need to tell you something. His expression grew carefully neutral, bracing for rejection, she realized, preparing to accept whatever she said with grace. I've been thinking, she continued, about your letter, about my aunt's offer, about what I really want. And she took a deep breath. My life isn't in Boston, Cole. It never was. It's here, in Copper Creek, in this territory that's too hot and too dusty and too hard and too, she laughed softly, too much like me. Hope flickered in his eyes, quickly suppressed. Marian, I'm not finished. She reached out, taking his hand, the first time she had ever touched him voluntarily, and she felt the shock of it run through them both. I've spent 5 years building walls, Cole, telling myself I didn't need anyone, that love was a weakness, that I was better off alone. And maybe some of that was true for a while. Maybe I needed that armor to survive. But? But I'm tired of surviving. I want to live. I want to build something real, something lasting. And I want to do it with someone who sees me clearly and respects me completely and loves me without trying to change who I am. Cole's hand tightened on hers. Are you saying? I'm saying yes. The word came out steady and certain, all her doubt finally resolved. To you, to us, to whatever comes next. For a long moment, Cole simply stared at her, as if afraid he had imagined her words. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, the most genuine, unreserved smile she had ever seen him wear. Marian Ellery, he said softly, I've been waiting 5 years to hear you say that. I know. I'm sorry it took so long. Don't be. He lifted her hand, pressing his lips to her knuckles. You were worth waiting for. The sunset blazed around them, painting the world in shades of new beginnings, and Marian felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Peace. They announced their engagement the following week. The news spread through Copper Creek like wildfire, meeting with universal approval. Cole Harwood and Marian Ellery, the rancher and the merchant, finally admitting what everyone had seen for years. Martha cried when Marian told her, then laughed, then cried again. I knew it, she kept saying. I knew it all along. They set the wedding date for June, giving them time to prepare and allowing the spring rains to pass. Marian wrote to her aunt, explaining her decision in careful, respectful terms, thanking her for the generous offer while making clear that her life was in Arizona now. Aunt Catherine's response was surprisingly gracious. I am disappointed, she wrote, but not entirely surprised. Your mother made a similar choice, after all, and she never regretted it despite the hardships. Perhaps there is something in our bloodline that values love over luxury. I wish you every happiness, my dear. The invitation remains open should you ever change your mind. The weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of preparation and joy. Marian kept running the store. She had no intention of giving up the business her father had built. But Cole was there every day now, openly, no longer pretending he needed supplies. They planned their future together, discussing everything from ranch operations to how they would manage both enterprises to how many children they might want someday. It was the kind of partnership Marian had never dared to dream of, two equals building something together, neither one subordinate to the other. Cole respected her business acumen. She respected his knowledge of the land. They complemented each other in ways that seemed almost miraculous, as if they had been designed to fit together. The night before the wedding, Marian stood alone in her room above the store. The room she would soon be leaving, the room where she had spent 5 years learning to survive. She looked around at the familiar walls, the books piled on every surface, the narrow bed where she had lain awake so many nights wondering if happiness would ever find her. Tomorrow, everything would change. She should have been nervous. Instead, she felt only a profound sense of rightness, as if every step of her life had been leading to this moment. The letter from her aunt still sat on her desk, a reminder of the road not taken. Beside it lay Cole's letter, worn soft from handling, two futures offered side by side. She had made her choice. Marian picked up Cole's letter, pressing it to her heart. Then she walked to the window and looked out at the moonlit desert, the land that had claimed her mother, buried her father, and somehow become her home. I understand now, she whispered to the ghosts of her parents. I finally understand. The desert offered no reply, but the wind seemed to sigh in acknowledgement, carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers. Tomorrow, she would marry the man who had waited 5 years for her to see what had been right in front of her all along. Tomorrow, she would begin a new chapter, not as an escape from her life, but as a deepening of it. Tomorrow, she would step into a future she had chosen for herself, eyes open, heart willing, ready for whatever came next. And the letter that had once promised to take her away gathered dust on her desk, its power broken at last. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and golden, the Arizona sky stretching endless and blue above Copper Creek. Marian stood before the small mirror in her room, adjusting the simple white dress Martha had helped her sew over countless late-night sessions. It was not the elaborate gown a Boston bride might wear, but it was hers, made by her own hands and those of her dearest friend, and she loved it fiercely. You look beautiful, Martha said from behind her, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Your mother would be so proud. Marian touched the locket at her throat, the one that held her mother's tiny portrait. I hope so. I hope she understands why I chose to stay. She chose love too, remember? She would understand better than anyone. The church was only a short walk from the store, a modest wooden structure that served the spiritual needs of Copper Creek's small community. By the time Marian arrived, it was already filled to bursting. Ranchers and shopkeepers and their families crowded into pews meant for half their number. Word had spread beyond the town itself, and people had come from outlying homesteads just to witness the union everyone had been waiting years to see. Cole stood at the altar, looking uncomfortable in a suit that was clearly borrowed and slightly too tight across his broad shoulders. But when he saw Marian appear in the doorway, his expression transformed into something so tender, so openly adoring, that several women in the congregation reached for their handkerchiefs. Marian walked down the aisle alone, as she had done everything else in her life since her father's death. But she did not feel alone. She felt buoyed by the goodwill of her community, supported by the love of her friend, and drawn inexorably forward by the man who waited for her with his heart in his eyes. The ceremony was simple, as frontier weddings tended to be. Pastor Mitchell spoke of partnership and commitment, of the sacred bond between husband and wife. Cole's voice was steady as he spoke his vows, though Marian could see his hands trembling slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger. When her turn came, Marian looked into the whiskey-colored eyes that had watched her for 5 years and spoke words she had never imagined herself saying. I, Marian Ellery, take you, Cole Harwood, to be my husband, not because I need you to complete me, but because choosing you makes me more myself than I have ever been. I promise to stand beside you in prosperity and hardship, to respect you as my equal, and to build with you a life worthy of both our dreams. Cole's eyes glistened, but he blinked the moisture away and smiled, that rare, genuine smile that she had come to treasure above almost anything else. You may kiss the bride, Pastor Mitchell announced, and the congregation erupted in cheers as Cole pulled her close and sealed their union with a kiss that held 5 years of waiting and a lifetime of promise. The celebration afterward spilled out of the church and into the town's main street, which had been decorated with bunting and wildflowers for the occasion. Someone produced a fiddle, someone else a guitar, and soon the dusty thoroughfare had been transformed into an impromptu dance hall. Marian found herself passed from partner to partner, congratulated and embraced by people she had served across her counter for years, people who were genuinely happy for her happiness. Through it all, her eyes kept finding Cole, watching him shake hands with ranchers and accept slaps on the back from men who had once been his competitors. He caught her gaze across the crowd and smiled, and she felt a warmth bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with the Arizona sun. As evening fell and the celebration wound down, Cole took her hand and led her away from the lingering guests toward a wagon decorated with ribbons and flowers. Ready to go home? He asked. Home. The word had never sounded so sweet. The ride to the ranch took nearly an hour, the wagon bumping along rutted roads that wound through desert scrubland painted silver by the rising moon. They talked little, content in the comfortable silence of two people who no longer needed words to communicate. Marian leaned against Cole's shoulder, watching the stars emerge one by one, feeling more at peace than she had in years. When they finally arrived, Cole helped her down from the wagon, and then, to her surprise, swept her into his arms. What are you doing? Carrying you across the threshold, he said, grinning. It's tradition. I can walk, you know. I know, but let me do this, please. Something in his voice made her relent. She wrapped her arms around his neck and let him carry her up the porch steps and through the front door of the house that was now her home. It was not a grand house, not the sort of mansion her aunt inhabited in Boston, but it was solid and well-built, with large windows that would let in the morning light and a stone fireplace that dominated the main room. Cole had clearly made efforts to prepare for her arrival, fresh flowers standing in a vase on the table and new curtains hanging in the windows. I know it's not much, he said, setting her down gently, but I thought, over time, we could make it more like you want. Marian looked around, seeing not what the house was, but what it could become. She saw books on those empty shelves, saw children's laughter echoing off those walls, saw decades of memories waiting to be made. It's perfect, she said, and meant it. That night, as they lay together in the darkness, Marian felt the last of her walls crumble. She had spent so long protecting herself, so long believing that love was a trap rather than a liberation. But here, in the arms of a man who respected her too much to try to possess her, she finally understood what her mother had known all along. Love was not about losing yourself. It was about finding someone who made you want to become more. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance of adjustment and discovery. Marian continued to run the store, rising before dawn to make the journey into town and returning after dark with muscles aching and mind buzzing with the day's transactions. Cole never complained about her absence, never suggested she should give up the business her father had built. Instead, he helped where he could, driving her to town on mornings when the weather was rough, staying late to help with inventory when the books wouldn't balance. "You don't have to do this," she told him one evening, watching him stack crates with the same efficiency he brought to everything. "I can manage on my own." "I know you can. That's not why I'm here." "Then why?" He set down the crate he was holding and crossed to where she stood, taking her hands in his. "Because I want to be part of your life, Marian. All of it. Not just the parts that happen at home. If the store matters to you, then it matters to me. That's how this works." She stared at him, still sometimes disbelieving that such a man existed, that he had chosen her, that this was real. "I never expected this," she admitted. "I never expected any of it." "Neither did I." He smiled, that rare smile that made her heart skip. "But here we are." Here they were, indeed, building a life together, one day at a time. But even as the weeks stretched into months and Marian settled into the rhythms of her new existence, she could not entirely shake a lingering unease. Her aunt's letter still sat in a drawer at the store, a reminder of the path not taken. She told herself it didn't matter, that her choice had been made, that she was happy. And she was happy. Genuinely, deeply happy in a way she had never been before. But sometimes, late at night when Cole was asleep beside her and the house was silent except for the wind sighing through the eaves, Marian would lie awake and wonder. Had she made the right choice? Or had she simply taken the easier path, staying with what she knew rather than venturing into the unknown? She never spoke these doubts aloud. She was not even sure she could have articulated them if she tried. They were shadows, nothing more, flickering at the edges of her contentment. And then, just as she was beginning to believe they would fade entirely, everything changed. The letter arrived on a Thursday afternoon, delivered by a stagecoach driver who had been asked to carry it special from Boston. Marian recognized her aunt's handwriting immediately, but there was something different about this envelope, something formal and official that made her heart clench with sudden foreboding. She waited until the store was empty before opening it, her hands trembling slightly as she broke the seal. The letter was brief and businesslike, nothing like her aunt's usual warm correspondence. It was from a law firm, written on behalf of Catherine Hartford's estate. Marian's blood ran cold as she read the words that followed. Catherine Hartford had passed away 3 weeks prior, the victim of a sudden illness that had claimed her within days of onset. In accordance with her final will and testament, she had named her niece, Marian Ellery Harwood, as the sole beneficiary of her considerable estate, valued at approximately $50,000. $50,000. Marian sat down heavily, the letter trembling in her hands. $50,000 was an almost incomprehensible sum, more money than she would see in several lifetimes of running the store. It represented security beyond imagining, freedom from want for her and Cole, and whatever children they might have. It was everything she had once dreamed of, delivered now when she had stopped dreaming. But there was more. The letter continued, explaining that the family's lawyer would be traveling west to meet with Mrs. Harwood and discuss the terms of the inheritance. There were properties to be signed over, investments to be explained, decisions to be made. The lawyer would arrive in Copper Creek within the fortnight. And the letter noted almost casually, the family strongly encouraged Mrs. Harwood to return to Boston to properly assume her inheritance. There were social obligations to consider, business matters that required personal attention, and a house that had stood empty since Mrs. Hartford's passing. They wanted her to come home. Marian folded the letter carefully, her movements mechanical. She felt numb, disconnected from her own body, as if she were watching herself from a great distance. She should feel something, she knew. Grief for the aunt who had offered her a different life. Joy at the unexpected windfall. Fear of what this might mean for the future she had chosen, but all she felt was a hollow uncertainty, a reopening of questions she had thought long settled. She did not tell Cole immediately. She needed time to process, to understand what she was feeling before she tried to explain it to anyone else. But he knew something was wrong the moment she arrived home that evening, her face pale and her movements distracted. "What happened?" he asked, taking her hands, his eyes searching her face with concern. "My aunt died." The words came out flat, emotionless. "I inherited everything. Her lawyer is coming to discuss the details." Cole was silent for a long moment, absorbing the news. Then gently he asked, "How do you feel about that?" It was such a simple question, and yet Marian found she could not answer it. How did she feel? She felt grateful and guilty and confused and afraid. She felt as if the ground beneath her feet had shifted, leaving her scrambling for balance. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't know how I feel about any of it." Cole nodded slowly. He led her to the chair by the fireplace and knelt before her, his hands still holding hers. "Whatever you decide," he said, "I'm with you. If you need to go to Boston to handle things, I'll come with you. If you want to bring the lawyer here and deal with everything from a distance, we'll do that. This doesn't have to change anything unless you want it to." Marian looked at him, this man who had waited 5 years without complaint and who now offered to wait again, to support whatever choice she made without question or resentment. "What if I wanted to go?" she asked, testing. "What if I wanted to stay in Boston, take over my aunt's life, become the person she always wanted me to be?" Pain flickered in Cole's eyes, quickly suppressed, but his voice remained steady. Then I would miss you every day for the rest of my life. But I would never hold you here against your will. I told you once that I love you too much to cage you, Marian. That hasn't changed. Even now? Even now." He lifted her hands to his lips. "You are not a possession, Marian Harwood. You are a person, with your own dreams and desires and the right to chase them wherever they lead. If Boston is where you need to be, then that's where you should go." Marian felt tears prick her eyes. Not tears of sorrow, but of something else. Something she could not quite name. This man, this steady, patient, impossibly generous man, was offering her freedom at the very moment when most husbands would be demanding loyalty. "And if I choose to stay?" she asked. "Then I will spend every day thanking God for my good fortune." He smiled, that rare smile that made everything else fall away. "But the choice has to be yours, Marian. Made for your own reasons, not for mine." She leaned forward and kissed him, pouring into that kiss all the gratitude and love and confusion she could not put into words. "I need time," she said when they finally pulled apart. "I need to think." "Take all the time you need." It was what he had said months ago when he first handed her his letter, and just as then she knew he meant every word. The lawyer arrived 2 weeks later, a thin, precise man named Edmund Thorne, who seemed perpetually uncomfortable in the Arizona heat. He met with Marian and Cole in the ranch house, spreading documents across the kitchen table and explaining in careful detail the extent of Catherine Hartford's estate. It was even more than the letter had suggested. There was the Boston house, of course, a grand townhome in a fashionable neighborhood. There were investments in railroad companies and textile mills, stocks that paid regular dividends. There was jewelry, artwork, furniture, an entire life condensed into columns of numbers that made Marian's head spin. "Your aunt was a careful steward of her wealth," Thorne explained. "She had no children of her own, and after your mother's departure, you became her sole heir. She updated her will regularly, always ensuring that should anything happen to her, you would be provided for." "Even though I refused her invitation?" Thorne smiled thinly. "Your refusal seemed to strengthen her resolve, actually. She told me once that you were more like your mother than you knew, and that such spirit deserved to be rewarded." Marian glanced at Cole, who sat quietly beside her, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of information. He had said little throughout Thorne's presentation, offering no opinions, making no suggestions. This was her decision to make. "What are my options?" she asked. Thorne outlined them methodically. She could sell everything and invest the proceeds, living off the income without ever leaving Arizona. She could keep the properties and hire managers to oversee them, visiting Boston periodically to ensure things were in order. Or she could relocate to Boston and assume her aunt's position in society, taking over the life Catherine had always hoped she would claim. The family would prefer the latter, Thorne added carefully. There are social obligations, business relationships that benefit from personal attention. Your aunt was an important figure in certain circles. Her absence has created a vacuum. What family? Marian asked sharply. I thought my aunt had no one. No direct heirs, no. But there are cousins, in-laws, business partners who considered themselves close to Mrs. Hartford. They have been asking about you, wondering what you intend to do. And what business is it of theirs? Thorne had the grace to look uncomfortable. Money creates obligations, Mrs. Harwood, whether we wish it or not. After Thorne left, promising to return in a few days for her decision, Marian stood on the porch and watched the sun set over the desert. Cole came to stand beside her, not touching, just present. $50,000, she said quietly. Can you even imagine? I can imagine what it would mean for the ranch, Cole admitted. New equipment, more cattle, hired hands so I wouldn't have to work dawn to dusk. I can imagine what it would mean for your store, for our future children. He paused. But I can also imagine losing you to it. You wouldn't lose me, wouldn't I? He turned to face her. Marian, I'm a rancher. I know cattle and horses and land. I don't know society or business or the kind of people who inherit $50,000. If you went to Boston, even for a little while, you might realize you belong there. You might see what you've been missing all these years. And if I did, would that be so terrible? For me? Yes. His voice was raw with honesty. But not for you, if it was what you truly wanted. They stood in silence for a long moment, watching the sky darken from orange to purple to the deep blue of approaching night. I need to see it, Marian said finally. The house, the city, all of it. I need to understand what I'm choosing between. Cole nodded slowly, as if he had been expecting this. When do we leave? You'd come with me? Did you think I would let you go alone? He reached for her hand. Whatever happens, Marian, we face it together. That's what marriage means. They departed for Boston 3 days later, leaving the ranch in the capable hands of Cole's foreman and the store in Martha's care. The journey was long and arduous, days of stagecoach followed by the clattering rhythm of the railroad, a steady eastward progression that felt to Marian like traveling through time itself. With each mile that passed, the landscape changed. The desert gave way to prairie, the prairie to farmland, the farmland to cities that grew larger and more crowded as they approached the coast. Marian watched through the train window with wonder and growing unease, seeing for the first time the world her mother had left behind. It's so green, she murmured as they passed through Pennsylvania. I didn't know there was so much green in the world. Cole, who had grown progressively more silent as they traveled east, only nodded. He was a fish out of water here, his rancher's clothes and sun-weathered face marking him as an outsider among the well-dressed passengers who filled the first-class car. But he bore the discomfort without complaint, never once suggesting that Marian should have made this journey alone. They arrived in Boston on a gray afternoon, the sky heavy with clouds that seemed to press down on the city like a weight. A carriage met them at the station, sent by Thorne, and carried them through streets that made Marian dizzy with their crowded complexity. There were buildings everywhere, taller than anything she had ever seen, pressing in from all sides until she felt she could barely breathe. And then they turned a corner, and there it was. The Hartford house rose before them like something from a fairy tale, a grand brownstone with tall windows and an ornate facade that spoke of old money and established power. A wrought iron fence enclosed a small front garden, and the steps leading to the front door were swept clean despite the threatening rain. This is it, Marian whispered. This is what she wanted me to have. Cole said nothing, but she could feel his hand tighten on hers. They were greeted at the door by a housekeeper named Mrs. Carroll, a stiff, efficient woman who had served Catherine Hartford for 20 years and who regarded Marian with a mixture of curiosity and assessment. "Welcome home, Mrs. Harwood," she said, and the words sent a chill down Marian's spine. Home. This was not her home. This was a stranger's house, filled with a stranger's possessions, haunted by the ghost of an aunt she had never truly known. But as Mrs. Carroll led them through room after room, each more elegant than the last, Marian began to understand the seduction of it. The furniture was exquisite, carved mahogany and soft velvet, not a scratch or stain to be seen. The walls were hung with paintings that probably cost more than the ranch was worth. Every surface gleamed with polish. Every window sparkled. Every detail spoke of comfort and refinement and a life entirely free of want. "Your aunt's study," Mrs. Carroll said, opening a final door. "She spent most of her time here toward the end." It was a small room compared to the others, but warm and inviting, with shelves of books lining every wall and a fire laid ready in the grate. A desk sat by the window, covered with papers and correspondence, the evidence of a life interrupted, and there, on the corner of the desk, was a framed photograph. Marian picked it up with trembling hands. It showed two young women, their faces alight with mischief and joy, their arms around each other in a pose of easy affection. "Your mother and your aunt," Mrs. Carroll said softly. "Taken the summer before your mother left." Marian stared at the image, at the face of the woman she had never known except through stories. Sarah Hartford, not yet Sarah Ellery, looking at the camera with eyes full of hope for a future she could not have imagined. "They were so happy," Marian whispered. "They were the best of friends," Mrs. Carroll agreed. "Your aunt never truly recovered from losing her. She spoke of your mother often, especially at the end." Marian set the photograph down carefully, her throat tight with emotion. $50,000 was an abstract concept, numbers on a page. But this photograph, this room full of books, this house where her mother had grown up and dreamed and eventually chosen to leave, this was real. This was a connection to a past she had never been able to access. This was family. The days that followed were a whirlwind of meetings and decisions. Thorne introduced Marian to bankers and lawyers and distant relatives who eyed her with varying degrees of warmth and calculation. She toured the properties her aunt had owned, met with the managers of the investments that now belonged to her, and slowly began to understand the scope of what she had inherited. Cole stayed by her side through all of it, a silent, steady presence who asked no questions and offered no opinions. But Marian could see how uncomfortable he was, how out of place he felt in the drawing rooms and dining halls of Boston society. He endured it for her sake, she knew, and her love for him deepened with each passing day. But so did her confusion. Because Boston was not the cold, intimidating place she had expected. The cousins her aunt had left behind, while initially reserved, warmed to her quickly, seeming genuinely pleased to have a new member of their family fold. They invited her to dinners and afternoon teas, introduced her to friends who expressed admiration for her pioneer spirit, and made her feel welcome in ways she had not anticipated. "You could stay, you know," one cousin, a woman named Eleanor who was closest to her in age, said one afternoon. "We would so love to have you. The house feels empty without Aunt Catherine, and you're the closest thing to a sister she ever had." "I'm married," Marian reminded her. "My husband's ranch is in Arizona." "Yes, the Cowboy." What? Eleanor's tone was not unkind, merely curious. "Is that truly what you want, Marian? A life of dust and cattle and isolation, when you could have all of this?" She gestured expansively, taking in the elegant parlor where they sat, the fine china on the table, the view of Boston Common through the tall windows. Marian did not answer. She could not answer, because the truth was, she no longer knew. At night, she lay awake beside Cole in the grand bedroom that had once belonged to her aunt, staring at the ornate ceiling and trying to untangle her own heart. "You're not sleeping," Cole said quietly, his voice rough with the effort of staying awake. "Neither are you." He turned toward her in the darkness. "I can hear you thinking. It's deafening." Despite herself, Marian laughed. "I'm sorry. I know this hasn't been easy for you. It hasn't been easy for either of us." He reached out, finding her hand beneath the sheets. "Talk to me, Marian. Tell me what you're feeling." "I don't know what I'm feeling," she admitted. "That's the problem." "Try." She was quiet for a long moment, searching for words. "I thought I had made my choice," she finally said. "I thought I knew what I wanted. But being here, seeing all of this, it stirred up things I didn't know were still there." "Regret?" "No, not regret. She squeezed his hand. I don't regret marrying you, Cole. I don't regret staying in Copper Creek. But there's a part of me that wonders about the life I might have had, about who I might have become if I'd come here instead. Cole was silent, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. That's natural, he said at last. You're seeing a different version of your life, a path not taken. Of course you wonder. But I shouldn't wonder. I made my choice. I should be certain. Should you? He propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her in the dim light. Marion, you're not a saint. You're a person, with all the messiness that entails. You can love our life and still wonder about alternatives. That doesn't make you a traitor. It makes you human. What if I can't stop wondering? Then we deal with that too. His voice was steady, certain. Together. She pulled him down and kissed him, needing his presence, his solidity, his unwavering faith. He kissed her back with tenderness, with patience, with the quiet passion that had always burned beneath his calm exterior. When they finally pulled apart, Marion felt something shift inside her, a settling, a clarity. I want to go home, she said. To Copper Creek? Yes, but first I need to do something. The next morning, Marion asked Thorne to accompany her to the cemetery where Catherine Hartford had been laid to rest. Cole offered to come, but she shook her head gently. This is something I need to do alone. The cemetery was quiet and green, a peaceful island in the midst of the bustling city. Marion walked among the headstones until she found the one she was looking for, a simple marble marker bearing her aunt's name and dates. She stood before it for a long time, not speaking, just breathing in the cool morning air and letting her thoughts settle. I never knew you, she finally said aloud. Not really. You were always just a name, a letter, a life I might have had. But being here, in your house, among your things, I feel like I'm starting to understand. A bird sang somewhere nearby, its voice bright and clear. You loved my mother, Marion continued. You never stopped loving her, even after she left. You wanted me to come home because I was the closest thing to her you had left, and I... Her voice broke. She took a breath and steadied herself. I can't stay here. I can't be what you wanted me to be. My life is in Arizona, with Cole, with the store, with the land my father chose. That's who I am now. That's who I've become. She knelt and touched the cold marble. But I want you to know that I'm grateful. For the inheritance, yes, but for more than that. For wanting me. For never giving up on me. For giving me a choice, even from beyond the grave. She stood, brushing off her skirt. I'll take care of your money. I'll make something good with it, and I'll come back sometimes to visit, to remember, but Boston will never be my home. She paused, then added softly, I think you understand. I think you understood all along. She left the cemetery with lighter steps, her decision made at last. 2 days later, Marion and Cole boarded a westbound train, the inheritance arrangements finalized and the future secured. She had arranged for the Boston house to be leased, the income adding to the considerable sum already generating from her aunt's investments. The money would be more than enough to transform the ranch, to expand the store, to build a legacy that would last for generations. But as the train pulled away from Boston and the city's towers disappeared into the distance, Marion felt no regret. She was going home, truly home, to the place where she belonged. Cole sat beside her, his hand warm in hers, watching the countryside roll past. No second thoughts? He asked. No. She leaned against his shoulder. I know where I belong. And where is that? She smiled up at him. With you. In Copper Creek. Building a life we can be proud of. He kissed the top of her head. That's all I've ever wanted. I know. She closed her eyes. That's why I love you. The train carried them westward toward the setting sun, toward the desert that had claimed them both. And as the miles fell away behind them, Marion felt the last of her doubts dissolve like morning mist. She had held 2 letters, 2 futures, 2 versions of the life she might have lived, and she had chosen love. Not the kind of love that consumed or destroyed, but the kind that built and sustained and grew stronger with each passing day. The kind of love her mother had chosen all those years ago and never regretted. The kind of love that was worth more than $50,000, more than society balls and elegant parlors, more than all the comforts money could buy. The kind of love that made a home. They arrived in Copper Creek on a bright afternoon, the familiar desert landscape spreading before them like a welcome mat. Martha was waiting at the station, her face alight with joy. "You came back," she said, embracing Marion tightly. "I was so afraid you wouldn't." "I almost didn't," Marion admitted, "but then I remembered what I would be leaving behind." She looked at Cole, at the town that had become her community, at the store her father had built and she had saved. "This is home," she said simply. "This is where I belong." That evening, as she and Cole sat on the ranch house porch watching the stars emerge one by one, Marion thought about the journey she had taken, not just to Boston and back, but through her own heart. She had been afraid for so long, afraid of love, afraid of commitment, afraid of making the wrong choice and regretting it forever. But fear was not the same as wisdom, and caution was not the same as safety. Sometimes, the only way to know what you truly wanted was to see clearly what you would be giving up. Cole's arm tightened around her shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" "The future," she said. "Our future. What we're going to build together." "And what do you see?" She smiled, imagining it. The ranch, expanded and thriving. The store, supporting the community for another generation. Children, running through the house, filling it with laughter and life. Years stretching ahead of them, each one a gift they would unwrap together. "I see everything," she said. "Everything I never knew I wanted." Cole kissed her temple. "Then let's go get it." And so they did. The months that followed their return from Boston were the happiest Marion had ever known. Summer melted into autumn. Autumn gave way to winter, and with each passing season, the life she and Cole were building together grew stronger and more vibrant. The inheritance money, wisely invested, began to transform both the ranch and the store in ways that would have seemed impossible just a year before. Cole hired 2 additional ranch hands, freeing himself from the dawn-to-dusk labor that had consumed him for years. For the first time since building the place with his own 2 hands, he had time to breathe, to plan, to dream about the future rather than simply surviving the present. He expanded the herd, invested in better breeding stock, and began implementing irrigation systems that would protect the land against the droughts that plagued the territory. Marion, for her part, transformed Ellery's General Store into something her father would scarcely have recognized. She expanded the building, adding a second floor for storage, and a small lending library that quickly became the pride of Copper Creek. She brought in goods from back east that the territory had never seen, luxuries that made the frontier wives gasp with delight and the ranchers shake their heads at their emptying pockets. But more than the material improvements, it was the rhythm of their days that brought Marion the deepest satisfaction. She and Cole had found a balance, a partnership that allowed each of them to pursue their own work while always returning to each other at day's end. They ate breakfast together before dawn, discussing the day's plans. They reunited for supper, sharing stories of customers and cattle, challenges overcome and small victories won. And at night, in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, they talked about everything and nothing, learning each other in ways that went far beyond the physical. "I never imagined it could be like this," Marion confessed one evening, lying in Cole's arms as the winter wind howled outside their window. "I thought marriage was about compromise, about giving things up. But with you, I feel like I've gained more than I ever had alone." Cole pressed a kiss to her hair. "That's how it's supposed to be. 2 people becoming more together than they could be apart." "Is that what your parents had?" "It's what they taught me to want." He was quiet for a moment. "I watched them my whole life, the way they worked together, respected each other, built something that lasted. I always knew that when I found the right woman, I would treat her the way my father treated my mother." "And have you? Found the right woman?" He tilted her chin up and kissed her softly. "What do you think?" She smiled against his lips. "I think you're stuck with me now, Cole Harwood." "Good. I wouldn't have it any other way." Spring arrived with its usual violence, the desert erupting in sudden storms that turned dry washes into raging rivers and painted the hillsides with wildflowers. Marion had grown accustomed to the territory's unpredictable weather, But this year the storms seemed fiercer than usual, more frequent, more destructive. Old-timers in town muttered about bad omens and record rainfall, their weathered faces creased with worry. "It's going to be a hard season," Cole said one morning, studying the clouds that had gathered on the horizon. "The creek's already higher than I've ever seen it. If we get much more rain, we could have real problems." Marion stood beside him on the porch, watching the sky darken. "What kind of problems?" "Flooding, lost cattle, damaged fences." He shook his head. "The ranch is on high ground, so the house should be safe. But the lower pastures, the ones near the creek, if the water rises too much, we could lose everything we've built there. What can we do?" "Prepare. Move the cattle to higher ground. Reinforce what we can." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "And pray." They spent the next week in a frenzy of preparation, working alongside the ranch hands to move livestock and secure buildings against the coming deluge. Marion threw herself into the work with the same determination she brought to everything, refusing to be relegated to the sidelines while the men handled the physical labor. "You don't have to do this," Cole told her one afternoon, watching her struggle with a fence post that seemed determined to resist her efforts. "You could stay in the house where it's dry. And leave you out here alone? Not a chance." She wiped sweat from her brow and attacked the post again. "We're partners, remember? That means I share the work as well as the rewards." Cole's expression softened with something that looked like wonder. "Have I told you lately how much I love you?" "Not in the last hour. You're falling behind." He laughed, a sound that seemed to push back the gathering clouds. "I love you, Marion Harwood. More than I have words to say." "Then stop talking and help me with this post." They worked together, the wind picking up around them, and Marion felt a fierce joy burning in her chest. This was what she had chosen. This was what she had stayed for. Not ease or comfort, but this partnership in the face of adversity, this certainty that whatever came, they would face it side by side. The storm broke 3 days later. It began with a rumble of thunder so deep Marion felt it in her bones, followed by a flash of lightning that split the sky like a wound. Then the rain came. Not the gentle showers she had known in her first years on the frontier, but a torrential downpour that seemed intent on washing the world clean of everything man had built. Marion and Cole huddled in the ranch house with the hands, listening to the rain hammer against the roof and watching through the windows as the landscape transformed before their eyes. The creek, already swollen from weeks of wet weather, rose with terrifying speed, spilling over its banks and spreading across the lower pastures like a living thing, hungry and unstoppable. "The cattle," one of the hands said, his voice tight with fear. "We didn't get them all to high ground." Cole was already reaching for his hat. "How many?" 30, maybe 40 head. They're in the south pasture near the old windmill. "That's the lowest point on the property." Cole's jaw tightened. "The water will reach them within the hour." "You can't go out there," Marion said, grabbing his arm. "It's too dangerous. The creek's already flooding, and in this rain you won't be able to see where you're going." "I can't leave them to drown, Marion. Those cattle represent months of work, thousands of dollars. If we lose them, if we lose you, none of it matters." Their eyes met, and Marion saw the conflict playing across his face. He was a man who had built everything he had with his own 2 hands, who had never asked anyone else to take risks he wasn't willing to take himself. The thought of sitting safely in the house while his livelihood was swept away went against every instinct he possessed. "I'm coming with you," she said. "Absolutely not." "Cole, I wasn't asking permission." She was already pulling on her boots, her movements quick and determined. "You need help out there, and I'm not going to sit here worrying while you risk your life alone. Either we go together, or neither of us goes." He stared at her for a long moment, and she saw the moment he recognized the futility of arguing. She was as stubborn as he was, and they both knew it. "Stay close to me," he said finally. "And if I tell you to run, you run. No questions, no heroics. Understood?" "Understood." They rode out into the storm together, the rain so thick it was like riding through a waterfall. Marion could barely see her horse's ears, let alone the landscape around her, but she trusted Cole to know the way and kept her mount close behind his. The sound was overwhelming, rain and wind and thunder combining into a roar that drowned out everything else. She could feel the horse trembling beneath her, the animal's fear matching her own. But she pushed it down, forced herself to focus on the task at hand. Panic would not save the cattle. Panic would not save anyone. They reached the south pasture to find it already half submerged, the water rising with every passing minute. The cattle were huddled together on a small rise, their eyes wild with terror, their lowing barely audible over the storm. "We need to drive them toward the ridge," Cole shouted, pointing to higher ground to the east. "It's the only way out that isn't already flooded." Marion nodded, understanding immediately. They split up, Cole circling around to the far side of the herd, while Marion positioned herself to block their retreat. The cattle, panicked and confused, were reluctant to move, but between the two of them, they managed to get the animals headed in the right direction. It was slow, grueling work. The water was up to the horses' knees now, and still rising. The rain showed no sign of letting up, and the light was fading fast as evening approached. Marion's arms ached from controlling her frightened horse, and her throat was raw from shouting commands the cattle probably couldn't hear. But inch by inch, they made progress. The herd moved toward the ridge, stumbling and splashing through the floodwaters, driven by the desperate energy of two people who refused to give up. They were almost there when disaster struck. A massive surge of water, released by some upstream obstruction giving way, swept through the pasture with the force of a freight train. Marion felt her horse go down beneath her, felt herself thrown through the air, felt the shocking cold of the water closing over her head. For a terrible moment, she couldn't tell which way was up. The current tumbled her like a rag doll, filling her mouth and nose with muddy water, dragging her along with irresistible force. She clawed at the water, at the debris rushing past her, searching desperately for something, anything, to hold on to. Her hand struck something solid, and she grabbed it. A branch or a piece of fencing, she couldn't tell. She hauled herself up, breaking the surface with a gasp, coughing out water as she struggled to orient herself. "Marion!" Cole's voice cut through the storm, ragged with fear. She turned toward the sound and saw him fighting his way toward her, his horse struggling against the current that threatened to sweep them both away. "Here!" she shouted. "I'm here!" He reached her in what seemed like an eternity, his strong arm wrapping around her waist and pulling her onto his horse. She clung to him, shaking with cold and shock, as he urged the animal toward higher ground. "Hold on," he said in her ear. "Just hold on." She did. She held on with every ounce of strength she had left, her fingers digging into his shirt, her face pressed against his back. The horse struggled up the slope, its hooves slipping on the muddy ground, and for one heart-stopping moment Marion thought they were going to slide back into the water, but the animal found its footing, and suddenly they were on solid ground, above the floodline, safe. Cole pulled the horse to a stop and turned to look at her, his hands running over her face, her arms checking for injuries. His eyes were wild with a fear she had never seen before. "Are you hurt? Marion, are you hurt?" "I'm fine," she managed, though her voice came out as a croak. "I'm fine, Cole. I'm all right." He pulled her against him, his arms crushing her close, and she felt him shaking, his whole body trembling with the aftermath of terror. "I thought I lost you," he whispered. "When you went under, I thought, God, Marion, I thought, I'm here." She wrapped her arms around him, holding him as tightly as he held her. "I'm right here." They stayed like that for a long moment, the rain still falling around them, the storm still raging, but none of it mattering because they were together. They were alive. They had survived. Finally, Cole pulled back, his hands cupping her face. "Don't ever do that to me again," he said, his voice rough. "Do you understand me? Never again." "I'll try," she said, managing a weak smile. "But I make no promises. You know how stubborn I am." He kissed her then, hard and desperate, a kiss that tasted of rain and relief and something fiercer than either. When he finally let her go, his eyes had lost some of their wildness, replaced by a determination she recognized all too well. "The cattle," he said. "Most of them made it to the ridge. Let's finish the job." They worked through the night, driving the surviving cattle to safety, checking on the ranch hands who had stayed behind. The storm eventually passed, leaving behind a landscape transformed by destruction, the lower pastures unrecognizable beneath several feet of standing water. But they had saved the herd. Not all of it. Perhaps a dozen head had been lost to the flood, but the majority had survived because two people had refused to give up, had refused to accept defeat. As dawn broke over the devastated ranch, Marion and Cole stood on the porch of their home, exhausted beyond measure, but alive. The sun was rising through a break in the clouds, painting the floodwaters gold and promising better days to come. "We'll rebuild," Cole said quietly, surveying the damage. "We've done it before. We'll do it again." Marion leaned against his shoulder, too tired for words. She thought about the woman she had been a year ago, the woman who had clutched her aunt's letter and dreamed of escape. That woman would not have ridden into a storm. That woman would not have risked her life for cattle she had no real claim to. That woman would have watched from safety and counted the cost. But she was not that woman anymore. She was Marion Harwood, wife of a rancher, partner in building something that mattered. She had chosen this life with her eyes open, and tonight she had proven to herself as much as to anyone that she was worthy of it. "Cole," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I love you." He turned to look at her, and despite the exhaustion in his face, despite the worry for his damaged land and lost cattle, he smiled. That rare, genuine smile that she treasured above everything else. "I know," he said. "I've known for a while. I just wanted to say it. After tonight, I wanted you to hear it." He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You showed me tonight, Marion. You didn't need to say it, but I'm glad you did." They stayed on the porch until the sun had fully risen, watching their damaged world begin to drain and dry. There would be weeks of cleanup ahead, months of rebuilding. The work would be hard, the setbacks frustrating, the progress slow. But they would do it together, and that made all the difference. The weeks following the flood tested Marion and Cole in ways neither had anticipated. The damage was extensive, not just to the ranch, but to the entire community. Copper Creek itself had flooded, washing out several buildings and destroying crops that families depended on for survival. The store had suffered water damage to the lower shelves, ruining inventory Marion had spent months accumulating. But out of the destruction came something unexpected, a deepening of community bonds that transformed neighbors into family. Everyone helped everyone. Ranchers who had been competitors for years worked side by side to rebuild fences and round up scattered cattle. Women shared food and clothing with families who had lost everything. The church became a temporary shelter for those whose homes had been destroyed, and the store became a distribution center for donated supplies. Marion threw herself into the relief efforts, using her organizational skills to coordinate the chaos of recovery. She kept lists of who needed what, matched resources to requirements, and somehow kept the whole operation running smoothly despite the overwhelming scale of the need. "You're amazing, you know that?" Martha told her one afternoon, watching Marion direct a wagon full of supplies to a family in need. "Half the town would have fallen apart without you." They would have managed. No, they wouldn't have, and neither would Cole. "I saw you two during the storm, Marion. I saw the way you worked together." Martha's expression was serious. "You're not just his wife anymore. You're his partner, in every sense of the word." The observation stayed with Marion long after Martha had gone. Partner. It was the word Cole had used in his letter, the promise he had made when he asked her to stay, a life we build together. She had believed him at the time, had wanted to believe him, but she hadn't truly understood what it meant until now. Partnership wasn't just about sharing the good times. It was about standing together when the floods came, about working side by side through exhaustion and fear and uncertainty. It was about trusting each other completely, knowing that when one faltered, the other would be there to catch them. She and Cole had that. She saw it clearly now, in a way she hadn't before. As the immediate crisis passed and life began to return to normal, Marion found herself thinking about the future differently. The flood had reminded her how fragile everything was, how quickly the things you built could be swept away. But it had also shown her how strong things could be when you built them right, with foundations deep enough to weather any storm. She wanted to build something like that, something lasting, something that would endure long after she and Cole were gone. She wanted children. The thought surprised her when it first surfaced, rising unbidden from some deep place she hadn't known existed. She had never considered herself maternal, had never particularly dreamed of babies and nurseries and the endless demands of motherhood. But now, watching Cole play with the children of families they were helping, seeing the tenderness in his eyes, as he lifted a crying toddler, she felt something shift inside her. She didn't say anything at first. The timing seemed wrong, with so much work still to be done and the ranch still recovering. But the thought persisted, growing stronger with each passing day until she could no longer ignore it. She told Cole on a quiet evening in late spring, when the worst of the cleanup was finished and they finally had time to breathe. They were sitting on the porch, as they often did, watching the stars emerge one by one. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice careful. "Always dangerous." She smiled despite her nervousness. "I've been thinking about our future, about what we want to build together." Cole turned to look at her, his expression attentive. And I think I want children. With you." The words came out in a rush, as if she was afraid she would lose her nerve if she spoke too slowly. "I know we never talked about it directly, and I know the timing might not be perfect with everything that's happened, but, Marion," Cole's voice stopped her rambling. He was smiling, that rare smile that made her heart skip. "I've wanted children with you since the day you agreed to marry me. I was just waiting for you to be ready." "You were?" "I know you've been afraid," he said gently, "of turning into your mother, of being trapped by motherhood, of losing yourself to domestic life. I wanted you to come to it on your own, when you were sure it was what you wanted." She stared at him, struck once again by how well he understood her, how completely he saw the fears she had never spoken aloud. "I was afraid," she admitted. "For a long time, I thought having children meant giving up everything else, becoming someone's mother instead of being myself. But watching you, watching us, seeing what we've built together, I don't think it has to be that way." "It doesn't." He took her hand. "We're partners, Marion. That doesn't change because we have children. If anything, it becomes more important." "You really believe that?" "I really do." He lifted her hand to his lips. "And I think you'll be an incredible mother, patient and strong and fierce when you need to be. Our children will be lucky to have you." "And you?" she asked. "What kind of father will you be?" "The kind my father was to me." His voice was soft with memory. "Present, reliable, always there to catch them when they fall and teach them how to get back up." He paused, and hopefully not too stubborn about letting them make their own mistakes. Marion laughed, leaning into him. "We're both too stubborn. Our children don't stand a chance. They'll be magnificent," Cole said, "just like their mother." They sat together in comfortable silence, the future stretching before them full of possibility. Marion thought about tiny fingers and first steps, about teaching a child to read from the books in her store, about watching Cole lift a son onto his first horse. She thought about the legacy they would leave, not just of land and property, but of love and partnership and the lessons that mattered most. She was ready. Finally, truly ready. It was Cole who first noticed the signs some weeks later. Marion had been tired lately, needing to rest in the middle of the day, sometimes feeling nauseated in the mornings. She had attributed it to the lingering exhaustion of flood recovery, to the long hours she was putting in at the store. But Cole watched her with knowing eyes, and one morning, as she pushed away her breakfast untouched, he spoke. "Marion," he said quietly, "when was your last monthly?" She froze, her hand still on her coffee cup. She tried to think, to count the days, and realized with a shock that she couldn't remember. The flood had disrupted everything, all the normal rhythms of life, and she simply hadn't been paying attention. "I don't know," she said. With everything happening, I lost track." Cole's face was carefully neutral, but she could see the hope he was trying to suppress. "Do you think—" "I don't know," she repeated. But even as she said it, she knew. Something was different, had been different for weeks now. Something she had been too busy to notice, too preoccupied to acknowledge. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I need to see the doctor. I'll come with you." "No, I need to do this alone. I need to know for certain before—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Cole understood. "I'll be here," he said. "Whatever the answer is, I'll be here." The ride to town felt longer than ever before. Marion's mind raced with possibilities, with hopes she was afraid to acknowledge, with fears she couldn't quite name. What if she was wrong? What if she was right? What if she wasn't ready after all, despite everything she had thought and felt. Dr. Harrison was a kind man, gray-haired and gentle, who had tended to the people of Copper Creek for 30 years. He examined Marion with professional thoroughness, asked questions, and finally sat back with a smile that told her everything she needed to know. "Congratulations, Mrs. Harwood. You're going to be a mother." The words hit her like a wave, washing away her fears and doubts, and leaving behind only a brilliant, blazing joy. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be. You're about 2 months along by my estimation. The baby should arrive in late autumn if all goes well." A baby, a child, a new life growing inside her, created from the love she and Cole had built together. Marion thanked the doctor, paid her bill, and walked out into the sunshine, feeling as if the world had been remade around her. Everything looked different now, brighter, more vivid, more full of meaning. She was going to be a mother. She and Cole were going to be parents. The ride home passed in a blur. She barely remembered dismounting, barely noticed the familiar surroundings of the ranch. All she could think about was finding Cole, telling him, seeing his face when he learned the news. She found him in the barn, brushing down one of the horses. He looked up when she entered, his expression shifting from calm to alert as he read something in her face. "Marion, what did the doctor say?" She crossed to him, her heart pounding. She took his hands, rough and warm and so achingly familiar, and looked into the whiskey-colored eyes that had watched her for years before she'd had the courage to see him back. "You're going to be a father, Cole." For a long moment, he simply stared at her. Then his face transformed, breaking into the widest, most unguarded smile she had ever seen, and he swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet, laughing with a joy that echoed through the barn. "A father," he repeated, setting her down but not letting go. "We're going to have a baby. In late autumn, the doctor thinks. A baby." He seemed unable to say it enough, as if the word itself was a miracle. Our baby. Marion found herself laughing too, caught up in his joy, in the rightness of this moment. They were going to be parents. They were going to raise a child together, teach it everything they knew, give it all the love they had. "I love you," she said, the words spilling out. "I love you so much, Cole. I can't believe we get to have this. I can't believe any of it." "Believe it," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "because this is real. You and me and whatever comes next, it's all real." He kissed her then, a kiss full of promise and gratitude and overwhelming love. And Marion kissed him back, feeling for the first time in her life that she had everything she had ever wanted, everything she had ever needed. The future lay before them, uncertain and challenging and impossibly bright, and they would face it together. The months that followed were a time of preparation and anticipation. As Marion's body changed, growing round with the life inside her, the community rallied around her with the same spirit they had shown during the flood recovery. Women who had barely spoken to her before stopped by the store with advice and hand-sewn baby clothes. Ranchers' wives shared stories of their own pregnancies, offering wisdom that had been passed down through generations. Martha was a constant presence, helping at the store when Marion grew too tired, keeping her company on the long afternoons when Cole was working the ranch. They talked about everything, about motherhood and marriage, and the strange journey that had brought Marion from a lonely orphan to a woman surrounded by love. "You're different now," Martha observed one afternoon, watching Marion fold tiny garments for the coming baby. "I don't mean just the pregnancy. You're settled, content." "I am," Marion agreed. "I spent so long being afraid, Martha. Afraid of love, afraid of commitment, afraid of being trapped. And now," she shook her head, smiling, "now I realize I was afraid of the wrong things." "What should you have been afraid of?" "Missing this." Marion gestured to the pile of baby clothes, to the store around them, to the window that looked out on the dusty main street of Copper Creek. "Missing the life I was meant to live because I was too scared to reach for it." The baby came on a cool November evening as the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. The labor was long and hard, and there were moments when Marion wondered if she had the strength to see it through. But Cole stayed by her side throughout, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, never once suggesting that this was women's work and he should wait elsewhere. And then, finally, after hours of struggle, she heard it, a thin, reedy cry that was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. "A girl," the midwife announced, placing the tiny, squalling bundle in Marion's arms. "A perfect, healthy girl." Marion looked down at her daughter, at the scrunched-up face and tiny fists, and felt something break open inside her. All the fears she had carried, all the doubts about whether she was capable of this, fell away in the face of a love so fierce and immediate it left her breathless. "She's beautiful," Cole whispered, his voice rough with emotion. He reached out, touching their daughter's cheek with a gentleness that made Marion's heart ache. "She looks like you. She has your eyes." And she did. Even half closed against the lamplight, the baby's eyes were the same whiskey color as her father's, warm and deep and full of promise. "What should we call her?" Cole asked. Marion had been thinking about this for months, turning names over in her mind, considering and discarding options. But now, looking at her daughter's face, she knew with sudden certainty. "Sarah," she said, "for my mother." Cole nodded slowly. "Sarah Harwood. It's perfect." They spent the first night as a family together, the three of them curled in the big bed, the baby sleeping peacefully between them. Marion drifted in and out of sleep, waking periodically to check on Sarah, to reassure herself that this was real, that she had actually become a mother. And each time she woke, Cole was there, watching over them both, his eyes soft with a love that seemed to grow deeper with every passing hour. "Go to sleep," he told her when he caught her watching him. "I'll keep watch. You need rest too." "I'll rest when I'm dead." He smiled. "Right now I just want to look at the two of you. I want to memorize this moment." Marion reached out and took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "Thank you," she whispered, "for this, for everything." "You don't need to thank me, Marion. This is what I wanted. This is what I've always wanted." "I know, but I want you to know that I understand now what you were offering when you gave me that letter. You weren't asking me to give up my dreams. You were asking me to dream bigger." Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he lifted her hand to his lips. "You understood all along," he said. "You just needed time to believe it." Outside, the wind whispered through the desert, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of morning. Inside, a new family slept, their lives intertwined in ways that would only grow stronger with time. And somewhere in a drawer at the store, 2 letters lay side by side, their words fading, their power long since exhausted. Marion had made her choice, and she had never been happier. The first year of Sarah's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and joyful discoveries. Marion learned the rhythms of motherhood, the strange alchemy of exhaustion and elation that defined those early months. She learned to function on fragments of sleep, to interpret the different cries that meant hunger or discomfort or simply the need to be held. She learned that love could be a physical ache, a fierce protectiveness that rose in her chest every time she looked at her daughter's face. And through it all, Cole was there. Not hovering, not interfering, but present in all the ways that mattered. He took the night feedings when Marion was too exhausted to rise. He walked the floor with a colicky baby while she caught precious hours of sleep. He changed diapers and warmed bottles and sang off-key lullabies that made Sarah gurgle with what might have been laughter or might have been protest. "You're good at this," Marion told him one morning, watching him make faces at their daughter while she finished her breakfast. "Better than I expected." "Better than you expected?" Cole raised an eyebrow. "Should I be offended?" "I just meant, most men I know think babies are women's work. They wouldn't dream of changing a diaper or getting up at night." "Most men are fools." He lifted Sarah to his shoulder, patting her back with practiced ease. "This is my daughter, my responsibility. Why would I miss a single moment of her life because of some foolish notion about what men should and shouldn't do?" Marion smiled, her heart full. "Have I told you lately that I love you?" "Not in the last hour. You're falling behind." It was a joke between them now, a callback to that desperate night during the flood when everything had changed. Marion treasured these small rituals, the private language they had built over their years together. It was another way they were connected, another thread in the tapestry of their shared life. The store continued to thrive, even with Marion's attention divided between business and motherhood. She had hired a young woman named Clara to help with the daily operations, a sensible girl who learned quickly and had a natural talent for dealing with customers. The arrangement allowed Marion to bring Sarah to work with her, the baby sleeping in a cradle behind the counter while her mother tallied accounts and ordered inventory. The people of Copper Creek adored Sarah. She became the unofficial mascot of the town, passed from arms to arms whenever Marion brought her to the store or to church or to any of the community gatherings that marked the passage of frontier life. Old ranchers who had never shown interest in children suddenly found themselves making silly faces to earn a toothless smile. Stern housewives melted into cooing grandmothers the moment they held her. "She has a gift," Martha observed, watching Sarah charm yet another crusty old-timer into a puddle of baby talk. "People just respond to her." "She has her father's eyes," Marion said, "and apparently his ability to make people love him without even trying. She has your stubbornness too. I've seen that look she gets when she doesn't want to do something. Pure Marion." Marion laughed, not denying it. She had already noticed her daughter's willful streak, the way Sarah would arch her back and wail when she didn't get what she wanted, the fierce determination in her tiny face when she was working toward some goal only she understood. "She'll be a force to be reckoned with," Marion said. "God help whoever tries to tell her what she can't do." Like mother, like daughter. As Sarah grew from infant to toddler, taking her first steps on the ranch house porch while Cole and Marion watched with bated breath, the world beyond Copper Creek continued to change. The railroad was pushing ever westward, bringing new settlers and new opportunities. The territory was growing, civilizing, becoming something more than the wild frontier Marion had known all her life. Some of these changes were welcome. The railroad meant faster mail, better supplies, connection to the wider world that had once seemed impossibly distant. Marion could now order books and fabrics and specialty goods that would have taken months to arrive just a few years before. The store's inventory expanded, and so did its customer base, as new families moved into the region and discovered the well-stocked mercantile in Copper Creek. But other changes were more troubling. Land prices were rising as speculators moved in, buying up territory and reselling it at inflated prices. Small ranchers who had worked their land for decades found themselves squeezed out by larger operations with deeper pockets. The old ways, the informal networks of mutual aid, and neighborly cooperation that had sustained the community through hard times were beginning to fray under the pressure of progress. Cole watched these developments with growing concern. He had built his ranch through years of hard work, but he knew how precarious such success could be. One bad season, one market collapse, one stroke of bad luck, and everything he had created could disappear. "We need to think about the future," he told Marion one evening after Sarah had been put to bed. "Not just our future, Sarah's future. What kind of world will she inherit?" "What do you mean?" "The territory is changing. The old ways are dying. If we want Sarah to have the same opportunities we had, the chance to build something of her own, we need to plan ahead." Marion nodded slowly, understanding what he was saying. The frontier was closing. The open land that had allowed men like Cole to rise from nothing was becoming scarce. Bought up by corporations and wealthy investors who saw territory as an investment rather than a home. "What do you suggest?" "I've been thinking about expanding the ranch, buying more land while we can still afford it, and maybe—" he hesitated. "Maybe investing some of your aunt's money in other ventures. Diversifying, they call it back east." "You want to use the inheritance?" "Only if you agree. It's your money, Marion. Your aunt left it to you, not to us. But if we're smart about it, we could secure Sarah's future and our own." Marion was quiet for a long moment, considering. She had been careful with her aunt's money, using it for improvements and investments, but always keeping a substantial reserve. It was a safety net, a protection against the uncertainty of frontier life. The thought of risking more of it was uncomfortable. But Cole was right. The world was changing, and those who didn't change with it would be left behind. She thought of Sarah, of the fierce little girl who was already showing signs of the woman she would become. She thought of the opportunities that money could provide, the education, the choices, the freedom to pursue whatever path Sarah's talents and interests led her toward. "What did you have in mind?" They talked late into the night, outlining plans and possibilities. Cole wanted to buy the Morrison spread, a neighboring ranch whose elderly owner was looking to sell. Combined with their existing land, it would make them one of the largest operations in the territory, stable enough to weather economic storms and valuable enough to provide security for generations to come. Marion suggested additional investments, using some of the Boston money to buy shares in the railroad company that was transforming the region. It was a risk, but a calculated one, tying their fortunes to the forces of progress rather than fighting against them. By the time they finally went to bed, they had the outline of a plan, a vision for the future that was ambitious but achievable. Marion fell asleep feeling excited for the first time in months, her mind buzzing with possibilities. The next morning, she rode into town early to open the store, Sarah bundled on her hip. The spring air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of wildflowers and the promise of warmer days to come. Marion hummed as she rode, feeling light and hopeful. She was unlocking the store's front door when she heard her name called. "Mrs. Harwood!" She turned to see a man approaching, well-dressed in the Eastern style, his face unfamiliar. He was perhaps 40, with sharp eyes and a smile that didn't quite reach them. "Yes? Can I help you?" "I hope so." He removed his hat, revealing hair that was thinning at the temples. "My name is Edward Stanton. I represent the Pacific Land and Development Company. I wonder if I might have a moment of your time." Marion's guard went up immediately. Land companies had been circling the territory for months, buying up property and pressuring holdouts to sell. So far, Copper Creek had largely escaped their attention, but it seemed that grace period was ending. "I'm busy, Mr. Stanton. I have a store to open." "This won't take long, I promise." He glanced at Sarah and his smile softened slightly. "What a beautiful child. Your daughter?" "Yes." Marion shifted Sarah to her other hip, putting herself between the child and the stranger. "What do you want, Mr. Stanton?" "Direct. I like that." He reached into his jacket and produced a card, handing it to her. "My company is interested in developing this region. We believe Copper Creek has significant potential, particularly with the railroad expansion. We're looking for local partners, people who understand the territory and its people." "Partners?" Marion repeated skeptically. "Investors, more precisely. We're offering shares in our development projects to established residents. It's an opportunity to profit from the growth that's coming rather than being swept away by it." "And if we're not interested in your opportunity?" Stanton's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Then you might find the next few years challenging. Progress comes whether we invite it or not, Mrs. Harwood. Those who embrace it thrive. Those who resist it." He shrugged. "Well, I'm sure you understand." Marion understood perfectly. It was a threat, wrapped in velvet, but a threat nonetheless. "Join us or suffer the consequences." "I'll discuss it with my husband," she said coolly. "Good day, Mr. Stanton." "Of course. Take your time." He replaced his hat and tipped it to her. "I'll be in town for a few days. At the hotel, if you'd like to continue our conversation." He walked away, and Marion watched him go, her mind racing. This was what Cole had been worried about, the encroaching tide of Eastern money and Eastern methods that threatened to wash away everything they had built. She told Cole that evening after Sarah was in bed. He listened in silence, his expression growing darker with each word. "Pacific Land and Development," he repeated when she had finished. "I've heard of them. They bought out half of Prescott last year. Anyone who wouldn't sell found their water rights challenged, their cattle rustled, their buildings mysteriously burned. You think they'd do that here? I think men like Stanton don't make idle threats." Cole stood and walked to the window, staring out at the darkening land. He's not wrong about progress. The territory is changing, and there's nothing we can do to stop it. But there's a difference between embracing change and surrendering to extortion. So what do we do? We talk to the other ranchers, see where they stand. If we present a united front, it'll be harder for Stanton and his company to pick us off one by one. And if that doesn't work? Cole turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw the same steel she had glimpsed during the flood, the fierce determination that had built a ranch from nothing and would not let it be taken without a fight. "Then we fight," he said simply, "with every tool we have." The next weeks were tense. Cole met with the other ranchers, explaining the situation and building a coalition of resistance. Most were willing to stand together, recognizing that their strength lay in unity. But a few, frightened by Stanton's veiled threats or tempted by the money he offered, began to waver. Meanwhile, Stanton worked to undermine them. He spread rumors about failing businesses and worthless land. He offered increasingly generous terms to those who would sell, while making it clear that those terms would not last forever. He was patient and methodical, applying pressure gradually, waiting for the coalition to crack. Marion watched it all with growing frustration. She had faced challenges before, had overcome obstacles that would have defeated a lesser woman. But this was different. This wasn't a flood or a drought or any of the natural disasters that frontier life prepared you for. This was a calculating human malevolence, a system designed to strip people of everything they had built. "We need to change tactics," she told Cole one evening. "Stanton is playing a long game, wearing us down. We can't win by just defending." "What do you suggest?" "We need leverage, something that makes us more valuable as allies than as enemies." Cole considered this. "The railroad," he said slowly. "They're planning to extend the line through the territory. The route hasn't been decided yet, and whoever controls the land along the route stands to make a fortune. Or lose everything if the route goes elsewhere." Marion's mind was working quickly now, seeing possibilities she hadn't considered before. What if we could influence the decision? What if we could convince the railroad to choose a route that benefits us and hurts Stanton's company? How would we do that? "I still have connections in Boston. My aunt's lawyer, Thorne, he knows people, influential people. If we could get him to advocate for a route that runs through our land rather than Stanton's," Cole stared at her with something like awe. "You're proposing to beat them at their own game." "I'm proposing to protect what's ours." Marion set her jaw. "Stanton thinks we're simple frontier folk, too unsophisticated to fight back." "He's wrong." They wrote to Thorne that night, explaining the situation and asking for his help. The letter went out on the next mail coach, and then there was nothing to do but wait. The waiting was the hardest part. Sarah turned 2 that summer, celebrating with a party that drew families from across the territory. She was talking now, a stream of chatter that delighted everyone who heard it. She had her father's easy charm and her mother's sharp intelligence, a combination that made her the darling of every gathering. Watching her daughter play with other children, laughing and running through the ranch yard, Marion felt her resolve harden. This was what they were fighting for, not just land and money, but the future, the world Sarah would inherit. She would not let men like Stanton steal that future. Thorne's response arrived in late August, a thick envelope that made Marion's hands tremble as she opened it. She read the letter quickly, then again more slowly, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. "Cole?" she called, her voice shaking. "Cole, come here." He appeared in the doorway, alarmed by her tone. "What is it? What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." She looked up at him, a smile breaking across her face. "Everything is right. Thorne did it. He convinced the railroad board to choose the northern route." Cole took the letter from her hand, scanning it rapidly. The northern route ran directly through their land and the land of their allies. It would bring wealth and opportunity to everyone who had stood together against Stanton's company. And it would bypass entirely the territory that Pacific Land and Development had been so eagerly acquiring. "This changes everything," Cole said slowly. "Stanton's company invested millions in land that's now worthless." Marion's smile widened. "They'll have to sell at a loss or hold on to property that will never appreciate. Either way, they're finished in this territory. And we're going to be fine. Better than fine." She took his hands. "We won, Cole. We actually won." He pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet, laughing with a joy she hadn't heard since the day Sarah was born. "I never doubted you," he said, setting her down. "Not for a moment." "Liar, you doubted plenty." "Maybe a little," he kissed her forehead. "But I never stopped believing. In you, in us, in what we could accomplish together." The news spread quickly through Copper Creek and beyond. The ranchers who had held firm found themselves suddenly prosperous, their land values soaring as speculation about the railroad's path became certainty. Those who had wavered, who had nearly sold to Stanton's company, thanked their lucky stars and their neighbors' stubbornness. Stanton himself departed the territory within the week, his smile finally cracked, his threats revealed as empty bluster. Marion watched his stagecoach leave from the porch of her store, Sarah on her hip, and felt a satisfaction that went beyond mere victory. They had protected their home. They had secured their daughter's future. And they had done it together, partners in every sense of the word. That evening, as the sun set over the desert in brilliant shades of orange and red, Marion and Cole sat on their porch watching Sarah chase fireflies across the yard. "We should celebrate," Cole said. "This victory deserves more than just quiet relief." "What did you have in mind?" "A trip to Boston." He looked at her. "You haven't been back since we settled the inheritance, and Sarah has never met your cousins." Marion considered the suggestion. Boston had been a complicated place for her, full of conflicting emotions and difficult choices. But things were different now. She was different, secure in who she was and what she wanted in a way she hadn't been before. "You'd really want to go?" "I want Sarah to know where she comes from, both sides of her heritage." He smiled. "And I want your family to see what their stubborn Western relatives have accomplished. They might be surprised." "Good. Let them be surprised." They made the trip that fall, traveling east by train, retracing the journey Marion had taken years before. But everything felt different this time. She wasn't a woman divided between two worlds, torn between past and future. She was simply Marion Harwood, wife and mother and businesswoman, secure in her identity and confident in her choices. Boston welcomed them with the same gray skies and cobblestone streets Marion remembered. But now she saw them differently, not as symbols of a life she had missed, but simply as another place, neither better nor worse than the home she had chosen. Her cousins were delighted to meet Sarah, exclaiming over her whiskey-colored eyes and her fearless curiosity. They marveled at how Marion had changed, at the confidence she carried herself with, at the partnership she and Cole so clearly shared. "You seem happy," Eleanor told her one afternoon, watching Sarah play with Eleanor's own children in the grand parlor of the Hartford house. "Truly happy. I wasn't sure you would be." "You thought I made the wrong choice?" "I thought you might come to regret it, giving up all of this for—" She gestured vaguely westward. "Dust and cattle." Marion smiled. "There's more to Arizona than dust and cattle. There's community, partnership, a chance to build something with your own hands and know that it's yours, that you earned it. And that's enough? More than society and culture and all the advantages Boston could offer. It's everything." Marion watched her daughter, Sarah's laughter ringing through the elegant room. "I have a husband who respects me as an equal. I have work that challenges me and fulfills me. I have a daughter who will grow up knowing she can be anything she wants to be. What more could I ask for?" Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I envy you, you know." "Envy me? You have everything anyone could want." "I have wealth and comfort and a husband who is perfectly adequate." Eleanor's smile was tinged with something sad. "But I don't have what you have. That certainty, that partnership. I don't have someone who looks at me the way Cole looks at you." Marion didn't know what to say. She had spent so long envying her Boston relatives, imagining their lives as perfect and privileged, that it had never occurred to her they might envy her in return. "It's not too late," she said finally, "to find what you're looking for." "Perhaps," Eleanor's smile brightened. "Or perhaps I'll just have to live vicariously through you, the scandalous cousin who ran off to the frontier and found something real." They stayed in Boston for 3 weeks, visiting all the places Marion's mother had known, telling Sarah stories about the grandmother she would never meet. They toured the businesses her aunt's investments supported, met with bankers and lawyers, and ensured that their affairs were in order. But when the time came to leave, Marion felt no regret. She boarded the westbound train with her husband and daughter, watching the eastern cities give way to farmland and prairie, and finally to the familiar red earth of home. "You didn't want to stay longer?" Cole asked, watching her face as the desert landscape rolled past. "No, I have everything I need right here." She leaned against his shoulder, Sarah sleeping in her lap, and felt the truth of those words settle into her bones. She had traveled far, had seen both the life she had chosen and the life she had given up. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that she had made the right choice. The train carried them home, toward the ranch and the store and the community that had become their family, toward the future they were building together, one day at a time. And as the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Marion Harwood closed her eyes and smiled. She was exactly where she belonged. The years that followed their return from Boston were kind to the Harwood family. The railroad came through exactly as Thorne had promised, bringing with it a wave of prosperity that transformed Copper Creek from a dusty frontier outpost into a thriving town. New businesses opened along the main street, families arrived seeking opportunity, and the community that Marion had come to love grew stronger with each passing season. Sarah flourished in this changing world. She inherited her mother's intelligence and her father's steady temperament, growing from a curious toddler into a bright, adventurous child who seemed to find wonder in everything. She learned to ride almost before she could walk properly, following Cole around the ranch on a patient old mare who tolerated her small rider's enthusiastic commands. She spent hours in the store with Marion, helping to arrange shelves and count inventory, absorbing the rhythms of business as naturally as she absorbed the rhythms of ranch life. When Sarah was 4, Marion discovered she was pregnant again. The news came as a surprise, but not an unwelcome one. She and Cole had talked about having more children, had hoped for them. But after years of trying without success, they had made peace with the possibility that Sarah might be their only child. "Are you happy?" Cole asked when she told him, searching her face for any hint of concern. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. She pressed his hand against her still flat stomach. "I was beginning to think it wasn't meant to be. Some things just take time." The pregnancy was easier than her first, or perhaps Marion was simply more confident, less afraid of the unknown. She continued working at the store until she couldn't climb the stairs anymore, then handed the daily operations over to Clara, who had become as much a partner as an employee over the years. Their son arrived on a spring morning, screaming his displeasure at the world with a vigor that made the midwife laugh, and Cole go pale with relief. They named him Samuel, after Marion's father, and from his first moments it was clear he had inherited the Ellery stubbornness in full measure. "2 children," Marion murmured, watching Sarah peer curiously at her new brother. "We have 2 children, Cole. We have a family." He sat beside her on the bed, one arm around her shoulders, the other hand resting gently on Samuel's tiny head. "A real family." Sarah took to her role as big sister with characteristic determination. She appointed herself Samuel's protector and teacher, explaining the world to him in serious tones that belied her 5 years. She showed him the horses and the cattle, the store and the town, the desert flowers that bloomed after rain and the stars that wheeled overhead at night. "She's going to be a wonderful mother someday," Martha observed, watching Sarah demonstrate proper block stacking technique to a dubious Samuel. "She's wonderful now," Marion said. "She's the best thing I've ever done." "Besides marrying Cole?" "Besides that," Marion smiled, "but she runs a close second." The children grew, and with them grew the legacy Marion and Cole were building. The ranch expanded to encompass most of the valley, a sprawling operation that required a dozen hands to run. The store became the largest mercantile between Tucson and Phoenix, a proper department store with 3 floors and a mail-order catalog that reached customers across the territory. The investments from Aunt Catherine's inheritance multiplied, carefully managed to provide security for generations to come. But more than the material success, it was the intangible things that mattered most to Marion. The family dinners where laughter echoed off the walls. The quiet evenings on the porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of fire. The moments of connection with Cole that deepened year by year, a partnership that grew stronger with every challenge they faced together. "Do you ever wonder," Cole asked her one night when the children were in bed and they sat alone beneath the stars, "about the road not taken?" "You mean Boston?" "I mean all of it. The life you might have had if you'd never met me, if you'd accepted your aunt's invitation from the start." Marion considered the question seriously, as she always did with Cole. He deserved honesty, even when honesty was complicated. "Sometimes," she admitted, "not with regret, more with curiosity, wondering who I would have become if I'd made different choices." "And what do you conclude?" "That I would have been someone else entirely, someone I'm glad I didn't become." She leaned against his shoulder. Boston Marion would have had money and status and all the advantages society could offer. But she wouldn't have had this. She wouldn't have had you or Sarah or Samuel. She wouldn't have built something with her own hands and known that it was real. You don't think she would have been happy? I think she would have been comfortable. There's a difference. Marian looked up at the stars, remembering a night years ago when she had made a choice that changed everything. Comfort is easy. Happiness takes work. It takes risk. It takes being willing to fail in pursuit of something that matters. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'm glad you chose risk. So am I, every single day. He kissed her then, a kiss that held decades of shared history and the promise of decades more to come. And Marian kissed him back, grateful beyond words for the life they had built together. The years continued to pass, each one adding new layers to the tapestry of their lives. Sarah grew into a young woman of remarkable intelligence and spirit, eventually leaving for college back east, the first woman from Copper Creek to pursue higher education. Samuel followed his father's path, taking over more and more of the ranch operations as Cole's hair turned gray and his step slowed. Marian watched her children become adults with a mixture of pride and bittersweet wonder. The babies she had held were gone, replaced by capable, compassionate people who carried forward everything she and Cole had tried to teach them. Sarah returned from college with a law degree and a determination to fight for women's rights. Samuel married a rancher's daughter from the next valley, and soon the ranch house echoed with the sound of grandchildren, a new generation running through the rooms where Marian had once paced with a newborn in her arms. We did well, Cole said one afternoon, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. He was 70 now, his hair silver, his face weathered by decades of sun and wind. But his eyes were still the same whiskey color that had first caught Marian's attention all those years ago, and his hand in hers was still warm and sure. We did, Marian agreed. She was 68, her own hair more gray than brown, her body carrying the aches of a life fully lived. But when she looked at Cole, she still saw the young rancher who had stood in her store with his heart in his hands, offering her a future she had been too afraid to want. Any regrets? It was a question he asked occasionally, and her answer was always the same. Not a single one. That evening, after the grandchildren had been collected by their parents and the house had quieted, Marian found herself drawn to an old drawer in her desk. She hadn't opened it in years, hadn't needed to. But something made her reach for it now, some instinct she couldn't quite name. Inside, yellowed with age, lay 2 letters, one on elegant Boston stationery, the other on rough paper that had been folded and refolded until the creases were nearly worn through. She picked them up carefully, these artifacts from another lifetime. The ink had faded, but she didn't need to read the words. She had memorized them long ago, had carried them in her heart through all the years of marriage and motherhood and building a life that exceeded anything she had ever imagined. Cole found her there, sitting at her desk with the letters in her hands and tears tracking silently down her cheeks. Marian? He crossed to her, concern in his voice. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. She looked up at him, smiling through her tears. I was just remembering. He saw the letters and understood. Gently, he took them from her hands, looking at them with the same wonder she felt. I can't believe you kept these. How could I throw them away? They're the most important letters I ever received. She took back the rough paper, the one he had written. This one changed my life, Cole. This one gave me everything. You gave yourself everything. All I did was ask. You did more than ask. You waited. You believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. You offered me partnership when the whole world was telling me to accept dependence. She pressed the letter to her heart. This letter taught me what love could be. Not possession or sacrifice, but 2 people becoming more together than they could ever be apart. Cole knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Even after all these years, the touch of his skin against hers could still make her heart skip. I meant every word, he said. I still mean them. I don't offer wealth, Marian. I only offer a life we build together. We built it, she whispered. We built everything. And it's not finished yet. He smiled, that rare smile that still belonged to her alone. We have years left, God willing. More grandchildren to spoil, more sunsets to watch, more time to spend together. Is that enough for you? After everything, is this life enough? This life is more than I ever dared to dream. He lifted her hands to his lips. You are more than I ever dared to dream. They sat together in the fading light, two people who had spent a lifetime learning each other, building together, facing every storm side by side. The letters lay on the desk beside them, silent witnesses to a choice made decades ago that had shaped everything that followed. Outside, the Arizona sky was turning the colors of sunset, red and gold and purple, spreading across the horizon like a blessing. It was the same sky that had watched over their wedding, their children's births, their struggles and triumphs, and all the ordinary days in between. It was the sky of home. Cole, Marion said quietly. I thought a letter would take me away. She looked at him, at this man who had given her everything without ever asking her to give up herself. But your letter gave me everything instead. He pulled her close, and they watched the sunset together, as they had done thousands of times before and would do thousands of times again. The story of Marion and Cole Harwood did not end with a dramatic flourish or a final revelation. It ended as all the best stories do, quietly, peacefully, with two people who had chosen each other again and again through all the years of their lives. They lived to see Sarah become a judge, the first woman to hold that position in the territory. They lived to see Samuel expand the ranch into an operation that employed half the valley. They lived to see grandchildren graduate and marry and have children of their own, a legacy that spread outward like ripples on a pond. And when the end finally came, as it must come for everyone, they faced it the way they had faced everything else, together. Cole passed first on a quiet winter morning, with Marion holding his hand and their children gathered around. His last words were for her, a whisper so soft only she could hear. Thank you for choosing me. Marion followed him 6 months later, slipping away in her sleep with a smile on her face. The family found her the next morning, peaceful and still, the letters clutched against her heart where she had held them as she drifted off. They buried her beside Cole, on a hillside overlooking the ranch they had built together. The headstone bore both their names and the dates that bracketed lives fully lived. But it was the inscription beneath that told the real story, words that Sarah had chosen because she knew her mother would have wanted them. 2 letters, 1 choice, a lifetime of love. Under the vast Arizona sky, beneath the same stars that had witnessed their wedding and their children's births and all the ordinary miracles of their extraordinary life, Marion and Cole Harwood rested at last. Their story was over. But the legacy they had built, the family they had created, the love they had shown was possible, that would live on forever, passed down through generations, a light that would never be extinguished. And somewhere, in a drawer in the old ranch house, 2 letters lay side by side, their words faded, but their meaning eternal. A woman had held a letter that promised escape. A cowboy had replaced it with his own, and together they had built something more beautiful than either could have imagined alone. The end.